this is Ken Adams, and welcome to this edition of the Valley View. And I'm joined this week by John Ritter, an author. And actually, the title of his book is The Oregon State Penitentiary, which will be coming out.
It's out.
It's out now.
Yes, it's out.
But John is a historian, and you've really been concentrating on Salem over the last few years, about kind of the history of Salem itself. So maybe you could talk a little bit about your work at the state penitentiary and about Salem history and how they're related.
Sure. I was a teacher and vice principal, and education programs manager at State Penitentiary, and I finished about 35 years there. And the interesting thing about it is I worked primarily during my history for Hoyt Cupp, the old gruff warden of the state pen, and he really liked history. So I would go down and talk history with him and tell him I want to go do this, and he'd say, go do it. And so I was able to learn about history, and two good friends of mine were Cecil Edwards, a Capitol historian, who was the longest-serving state employee on record. And he had a wealth of information and grew up in Salem and lived in Salem as I did. And David Dunaway, the state archivist, who taught me how to do research and how to look through Oregon's records, not only at the archives, but at the State Library, and the Salem Library has a wonderful collection. So I spent this time looking in Salem history and realizing nobody's ever written about Salem history. I mean, people write paragraphs, they write some essays, they do, little paragraph blurbs, but nobody's done anything on Salem history. So I started to research it about 25 years ago and learn about it, and I have a fairly good grasp of it, and there's a lot of history that nobody mentions.
For example?
Well, the Ku Klux Klan. Salem had the largest Ku Klux Klan west of the Mississippi. Now think about that. Alabama? Nah. Salem? Yes. And there are many counties in Oregon that still have an active Ku Klux Klan. We don't want to quite go into that because I don't want to have a lot of visitors late at night burning things in my yard. But Oregon still has active clans. It's interesting to note, Polk County was a large center of the Klan. Their high school was built in the 20s. During the years we had a Klan governor. The Speaker of the House was renamed himself Casper K. Kublai, KKK, in 1923. And the mascot of the Dallas High School is the Dragons. And the leader of the Klan is the Grand Dragons. There's only 2 high schools in Oregon that have the Dragons as a mascot, and both were built during the Klan years. Monroe, Oregon, and Dallas High School.
Well, I moved to Oregon about 8 years ago, and one of the things I noticed was that the population was mostly white.
Yeah.
And were they actively discouraging black families?
Oh, absolutely. And they would, advertising for Salem in the 1970s was Salem, Oregon, 99.9% white. Medford had the sundown law. No blacks on the streets after dark. So did Salem. Salem actually discouraged African-American settlement. It was illegal if you were a free black to come into the state of Oregon. And they didn't allow slavery in Oregon. They didn't want anything to do with it. So there weren't many African-Americans in town until after or during World War II and after World War II. There was probably 1 or 2 families in the 20s and 30s, and they lived very quietly. But we had a large minority population, much more diverse than we have now. Well, consider this. We had a large Chinese population. We had Chinese apothecaries, tea shops, silk stores, opium sellers, and an underground where the Chinese went underground to recreate. A lot of the buildings in downtown Salem are linked by tunnels, or were, and I've been through most of them. In fact, February 4th of this year at 7 o'clock, I'm going to talk at the Salem Library on the underground, the Chinese opium dens, crime bosses of the penitentiary, ethnic cleansing, the Ku Klux Klan, and the governor. It all happened in Salem. And so that's going to be from probably 7 to 9, February 4th.
So that's quite a history.
Oh yeah, a lot, and most people don't know about it.
No, I find it kind of. I mean, I'd heard about the Klan in Oregon, but I didn't realize it was so strong here in
They elected
Salem.
a governor,
Well,
Walter Pierce, who was inaugurated in his Klan robes. in a private ceremony. The other one was done in the Senate, in the House chambers, in a public ceremony. But he was a member and enjoyed their support. And he also passed a law that said you can have no private education in the state. All had to be state educated. And the nuns of the Holy Names from Sacred Heart Academy and St. Joseph's School, the Episcopal Diocese, the Jehovah's Witness, and the Lutherans took him all the way to the Supreme Court. And they won. They prevailed in freedom of speech. And the governor's law, which he passed in the Oregon legislature, was overturned and ruled illegal by the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, I'm having a hard time with it. It's hard to imagine that things were that bad.
Yeah, it's history.
Yeah.
Anything you ever want to imagine, you don't have to make it up.
Right.
It probably happened. I mean, lynchings downtown on 12th Street, Chinese were taken out and shot if they looked at a white woman, and nothing was done. We had, Salem had, in the turn of the century, they had a lot of horses downtown before automobiles.
Right.
And I don't know if you know the personal habits of a horse.
They don't wear diapers.
Well, a horse, there you go. That's what I was leading into. I didn't want to bring up the term, but horses drop 40 pounds of manure a day. And if you have 1,000 horses downtown, do the math for how many tons of manure you have. So they had inmates in a wagon that was called the poop patrol come out at 2 o'clock in the morning, chained to the wagon with shovels, scooping up, keeping the streets clean. Because they didn't want, when, as you know, once in a while it rains in Salem.
Just occasionally.
Just occasionally. And that would create a
real mess.
A muck of people to walk in. That's why we have sidewalks, to get people out of the mud.
Yeah, there were some pictures I saw of old Salem, and I noticed they had boards running across the street. Now I know why they had those boards there.
Muck.
Yeah, it wasn't because they were afraid to get their shoes muddy.
No, they didn't want to sink up to their hips in it.
Yeah.
And a lot of wagons got marred, Model A cars, Model Ts, I should say, the earlier one, got stuck in the middle of the street, and they'd have to have draft horses pull them out. And Salem had a wild riverfront. It's all gone now because my father's construction company in the middle 50s bulldozed the bank so that Boise Cascade could drop logs into the water. Before a log can be treated, it has to be soaked with water because it'll shred out. So they dropped the logs into the water to soak up water and then lifted them up by crane to be processed. So the bank was bulldozed sheer. There was no gradual flowing bank. Steamships used to butt up into the bank, and they used to have a great walkway and dock system. It was periodically flushed out by
floods.
By floods, but there's a picture of a steamship docking at the First Methodist Church downtown. Docking at it, because there used to be a slough on Ferry Street. Hello, Ferry Street. That's where the ferry used to be across the river, and where the Civic Center was a big swamp. And this steamship, there's a picture
could
of it.
go all the way up to.
Oh yeah, that's why the sanctuary, of the First Methodist Church is one floor above. If you go into it, the floor is above. If you go into the sanctuary of Cone Chapel, I think it's McCone Chapel at Willamette, it's one floor above because of the floods. It used to flood regularly. Houses in West Salem along Edge Water.
They were on the edge.
Used to be on stilts.
Well, and Minto Brown used to be an island.
Yes, and flooded regularly.
And it still does.
In West Salem, on my dad's property, which went down from the top of Wallace Road down to the river, 8-foot floods were not unordinary. I used to go down as a kid and pick up with a tractor City of Salem picnic tables that washed in. Call up the city and said, "You want them?" "Nope." So we'd drag them up, turn them over, and drag them up to the farmhouse to use for picnic tables. Repaint them, of course.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Yeah.
I know that about 3 or 4 years ago, there was some severe flooding on Mill Creek.
Yeah.
And some picnic benches from Muchas Gracias came down and wedged in a tree near a house that, you know, I knew the owners and like that. And I told the people at Muchas Gracias that one of their benches
They won't come and get them.
No. So the couple that owned the house, they used it on a regular basis.
It's called recycling.
Yeah, yes.
It's called being green.
And I noticed when they moved out, they took the picnic bench with them.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, smart people. But Salem was a tremendous city. Used to have Chinese walking down the streets, Kanakas. You know what a Kanaka is?
No, I do not.
Kanaka's a Hawaiian fur peddler who worked for Hudson's Bay. They were called the Kanaka Islands before the Hawaiians. And they were given land between Salem and Woodburn, which is called to this day French Prairie. And that's where Hudson's Bay retirees, engagés and voyeurs were given, you know, a couple hundred acres to retire on when they did their term of employment. And a lot of Hawaiians stayed and married into the Kalapuya tribe.
Oh.
So Salem was a very diverse community, much more than now. And downtown was bustling because downtown was the only place. You could go to, in 1922, you could go to a Jewish deli, you could go to a Chinese tea shop, you could go to a Jewish tailor and have a suit made, and a boot peddler and have some boots replaced or made. In fact, the Klan had a meeting once, and they met in the Oddfellows Hall downtown, and they were meeting there, and they said, let's go burn out some Jewish people. They used other derogatory terms. And the one Klan leader stood up and said, nah, I can't do that. I said, why? I'm not going to Portland to get my boots made, which was true. Well, then they couldn't burn out the Jewish people, so they said, let's go get some Catholics. So they were going to march out, and the Catholic farmers around Mount Angel, which there are a lot of them, heard about it. Mm-hmm. So they came down and barged into a Klan night meeting with shotguns and said, if you touch one farmer or one priest, we will kill you all. And you didn't mess with a farmer with a double-barreled shotgun.
Well, that's one way to
yeah.
stop the Klan.
Yeah. So they couldn't go against Catholics, so the only people left were the Chinese.
And they went after the Chinese.
Oh, yes, they did. That's why we do not have, except for modern times, a Chinese population in Salem. They were all burned out and either sent to Portland, Chinatown, Seattle's Chinatown, or San Francisco's Chinatown. Every town that had a railroad had a Chinese population because they built the railroads. And then the Klan ran them all out. They passed laws that said Chinese couldn't own property. Chinese couldn't act as jurors on a trial. It was the alien exclusion laws, the anti-Mongolian laws in the 20s and 30s, 1890s.
So this leads me to the question of who then did settle Oregon at the beginning as far as the non-native population here?
White missionaries, religious people settled here, and fur trappers. Jedediah Smith, was one of them, and a lot of the people that were in the fur trade settled here. But remember, Jason Lee and Marcus Whitman were wonderful proponents of settlement in the West, in Oregon Territory. They went back east and talked about it because it was free land.
Right, and fertile land.
Oh, yeah. You judge topsoil around the world by inches. In the Willamette Valley, it's judged by feet. And some say we have 14 feet of topsoil because of floods.
Right, and one of the other things that you do is like there's different compositions of soil. And I can remember when I was taking soil conservation that the Willamette Valley was very rich.
Oh, yeah. Very, very rich. You can grow anything. The only problem is the sun.
Well, that's true.
You gotta have sun.
Yeah, we get a little bit of sun.
We used to, when I was a kid growing up in West Salem, after we moved from D Street, we used to get 3 crops of alfalfa in a year. We used to get an early crop in May and June, a late crop in August, or a middle crop in August, July and August, then another crop in October. Of course, the best alfalfa, the heaviest, was the middle crop.
Right.
But 3 crops.
That's very good.
3 balings. Yeah. I don't know if they do it anymore, but I think they may with global warming. I don't know. But Salem is very diverse. It is, people say, oh, it's diverse now. Oh, no. Nothing like it used to be. It was really, we have the riverfront town. It was a railroad town. The railroads came here, and it was very, very busy.
And now, like the Oregon Trail it kind of emptied
Ended
out.
in Salem, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the end of the trail, which was a beautiful museum-type federal exhibit in Oregon City, it's gone now. That was called the end of the trail, because Oregon was the end of the trail.
Yeah, and a lot of settlers came out on that trail and
Absolutely.
settled. But
Yep.
see, my impression was too that a lot of them were from the more northern states like New England and
No, Midwest.
Midwest.
A lot of that's why we have in the old maps of Salem, you have, I believe, and I may be wrong, you have 2 streets named for states, Kansas, Nebraska.
Right.
That's where people came from. See, people used to move through across the United States in successive frontiers. The first frontier was New England.
Right.
The second frontier was the Appalachian Mountains. The third frontier was the Mississippi. The fourth frontier was the Trans-Mississippi West, the Midwest. But people skipped the Midwest because they didn't think they could grow anything because there was no trees, like there was in Michigan and Wisconsin and Illinois and Indiana. So they skipped the Midwest. That's why Arizona didn't become a state till 1880s.
No, it's actually 1912.
Oh, no, 1912. Okay, I stand corrected.
Yeah.
Well, Oregon was a state in 1859.
Yeah.
Well, why in the 1860s did Oregon become a state? And it took another 50 years for land that's a lot closer to the East Coast and the Midwest, Nebraska, to become a state. They didn't think it could be farmed.
Yeah, but actually, they don't have a lot of trees, but they have
the great forest in Nebraska is 2 trees.
Yeah. But the thing is the prairie grasses have extremely deep roots.
Yes.
And actually, they would use that then for building their homes,
Yes,
the sod homes.
Sod homes.
So it's
they didn't use sod homes in Oregon.
No, that would be a big mistake, I would think.
Big mistake, because it'd be all washed in the living room, yeah. But it's been kind of fun. It's been fun living in Salem and researching this. People are very interested for Salem history. And I co-authored this book on the state penitentiary because people don't know about state prison. They don't know about the many programs they had.
Well, give us some examples of...
Well, they had a boxing program for 30, 40 years where they taught boxing and brought the Capital City Boxing Club came into the penitentiary and held boxing matches. In the tunnels of the state hospital, I believe there's still a boxing rink. There was when I taught there in the middle 70s. It was a very busy community program. They used to run track programs, the state penitentiary, baseball teams. Into the 1980s, softball teams from the Attorney General's office would come in and play, and they get quite a few catcalls from the...
Well, I would imagine, yes.
Oh, yeah, he locked me up, that dirty sucker. So it was kind of interesting. But did you know the Depression? You remember that? You were middle-aged then.
No.
You were middle-aged then. Don't give me that. You were way over the hill.
Well, yeah, but it was my parents that lived through that. It wasn't me.
Well, during the Depression, they had a cannery working at the prison and after, and they had a food kitchen, a soup kitchen downtown where they gave away food and served people hot meals.
From the prison?
Yeah, State Street Cannery. They'd take produce from their farms. They had, 3,000 acres of farms over where Corbin is, and I think it's a Home Depot distribution center. Yeah, they had 3,000 acres. They had a fully functioning dairy farm that used to supply milk to Salem School District, Oregon State, Willamette, and other schools called what do they call that? Mill Creek Dairy.
So the prison system had a large working population.
Yes.
And the prisoners had... Now, what was the idea about just keeping them busy, or?
Well, that's the Ohio system of keeping them busy through work, but also the early wardens, especially Aschel Bush of the Bush House. Mm-hmm. He was a warden for a little while, and he said, what do we need in Oregon that everybody needs? Well, you need a wood stove. So he got Lowenstein and Loeb to come down and build a stove factory inside the prison. And they made these kind of stoves, were about as big as this table, and they had brackets on each side where they could run a 2x4 in and then pick up these stoves and move them around. So they were wanted for wagons, logging camps, sailing ships, steamships, because you could bolt this stove down and then unbolt it and move it around. So even though your vehicle for the stove may have been ruined or sold, you could save the stove. And on the inside oven door, it said prison made. There's very few of them left.
And this would also then provide the prisoners with some
Yeah.
actual skills
Yeah.
that they could use once they got out.
Absolutely. And that kind of morphed in to what I talk about. Hold up the book, Ken.
Okay.
Hold up the book. There we go. Finally, hello, we get the book held up. But the purpose for the season. But today we have Oregon Corrections Enterprises, which is about 14 different companies that operate inside the prisons. Call centers. I'm not wearing it today, but I have a Prison Blues sweatshirt. Fabric store in Pendleton, they make that. They have call centers all over. You never know when you call up for information from a country or from a company, are you talking to an inmate? You don't know. Department of Motor Vehicles has a hotline, a question line, staffed by women of the Coffee Creek Institution, and OSP has, you get in the state pen, there's a wonderful furniture factory. They did all the furniture of the Capitol.
And they have, I think they have an outlet here in Salem, don't they?
I don't believe that private citizens can buy things. You have to be kind of like a business or an institution.
Yeah, but I think I've seen a business.
Oh, yeah, it's over in State Street.
Yeah.
Oregon Correction. You can tour there, and they have a little museum there. You can go in and look at prison artifacts that I set up. And but they did a lot of the furniture for Oregon State University, the dorms, and for U of O. They do a lot of institutional stuff, and it's high quality. It's well made. Why buy it out of state when you can buy it in Oregon? I mean, employ some inmates, and they get paid a wage, and that's through a formula, and they can use that money to pay off a fine or a court settlement, and then they can send money home.
Oh,
and then they have a trade when they get out.
Right.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is one of the important parts of that, because too often when people get out of jail, it's hard for them to find a job.
It's almost impossible. But they do it. There's a lot of groups to do it. When I was there, we had quite an active school program. They don't anymore. We used to have a great vocational training and a GED program, and you could even take college classes through Schmeketa, and that's no longer true.
Well, that's unfortunate.
It
I would
is.
think.
The school's gone through mistakes of the administration of the education programs. It's gone.
And budget cuts.
And budget cuts. But it was more or less self-supporting, but it did a lot of good. And today, much less than yesteryear, because previous times you could do a dozen different occupations inside the prison. You have to understand it, and people don't understand this. The prison is a city.
Mm-hmm.
It's a complete functioning city. We have our own medical, our own ER, which I've been to. We have our own culinary, our own food service. They serve 6,000 meals a day. 2,000 plus inmates. They bake their own bread. I don't know how many thousands of loaves of bread they bake. They have to outsource their milk, meat, and dairy products, which you used to get from the prison farms. But a
lot of that land's been sold off.
Yes, it has. Yeah, Salem Industrial Park, and a lot of it's been. So Corbin University is where a lot of the farmland used to be. Those different hills around Corbin, which is a great school. They have Hog Hill, Chicken Hill, Pork Hog Hill, and Beef Hill, where they raise all these things. They had their own butcher shop, their own butchery, where they'd send meat out to all state institutions. But the prison had a big program going on. I mean, they used to keep the inmates busy. They had recreation, they had education, they had vocational training, and they had industrial work to keep them busy. Doesn't do any good to lock somebody up and not keep them busy. And they used to do it a lot, but no more did they have. They used to have a lot of community participation, come in with teams and play on Sunday, or track people from OSU and U of O would come in and run a track meet, and Valley Running League would run a track meet. Capital City Boxing Club, I believe that's the name. They used to come in and do boxing, and no more. It's all no more.
And playing baseball games with the Attorney General's office.
Yeah, they'd get police and Attorney General's office. He locked me up. Strike him out. They'd use other more genteel words.
Yeah, well, I actually was invited to go to San Quentin when I lived in California to play a softball game with the prisoners there. Unfortunately, I my job kind of got in the way because that weekend they had an emergency at work, so I didn't get to go. But I was, several of my friends went and played, and they said they had a great time because those guys were real competitive.
Very competitive. All they do is practice, so
yes.
they do. But the prison has had lots of different activities. They made horse tack and saddles. They made prison boots, which loggers loved because they said
held up.
They were good boots, and they made prison soap. I should have brought you a bar. No, I'm not talking about your personal cleansing habits, but I should have brought you a bar and showed you. It says Prison Pure, and it sold for 2 cents. It was the first soap with pumice in it. That was a big block of soap.
Oh, it's kind of gritty then.
Yeah, very gritty, and farmers and loggers liked it because it scrubbed you clean. And they made it out there.
Get it out of your fingernails, underneath the fingernails and like that. So, I would imagine there's probably a lot more we could go into, but is there something that we haven't covered that people might find surprising about the history of Salem?
Well, what they'd find interesting about history is, of course, the Klan involvement, the commerce they had, what the fur trapping industry did for Salem, and how the prison was integrated with the city of Salem. The prison used to sit outside the city limits on State Street, which is up in a hill, and a gradual hill. And a lot of people don't even know it's there unless they read something in the paper. But they used to bring inmates out. They used to bring people in for chess, religious functions, parties. The Indians used to have a salmon bacon powwow, and they'd bring community members in for that. The Jewish club used to have a Hadassah bake where they'd bring people in, and they'd do a bake sale in the prison. It used to be lots of different community organizations, and it was integrated with the prison.
Yeah, I think that's really a good thing because a lot of times people, I think, end up in prison because they feel isolated from the society as a whole. And this is kind of inviting them while they're in prison to get connected with the local community.
Yeah, absolutely. And they used to do that. I don't advise it, just walking up and say, I want to come in and volunteer. You can't do that. Get some training.
Oh, yeah.
Find out what you're getting into, because a lot of people get into trouble going into prison. Inmates are very, very, very bright, and they can think of ways to get you involved with them, and you don't want to do that, so you have to get training. But it's true. But no, people didn't feel isolated when they come into prison. They did a crime.
Right.
It used to be called, the state penitentiary used to be called the House of Pain, because you went in there to feel pain, and you do. You have to wake up with a bell. You have to go to sleep with a bell. You're told when to eat. You're told when to come out of your cell, when to take a shower. Showers are only twice a week, so it can get kind of ripe in there. But a lot of people in Salem were involved with the prison. 500 employees. They lived right around Salem. A Salem neighborhood used to be called Felony Flats. Did you know about that?
Yeah, it's just down the street from me.
Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Well, John, I want to thank you for coming in.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
I very much enjoyed this, and we'll have to have you come back and maybe explore some more hidden parts of Salem history. And this has been Valley View with Ken Adams, and I want to thank you for watching this week.